Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm pumped to have you here. I'm pumped to be here. We are dropping an amazing episode in just a couple minutes. I think you're all going to absolutely love. Our guest we had during this pandemic, actually, we had him, I believe, in June. His name is Dr. Dawson Church. I truly, truly think and believe that you're going to love his message. For those of you that know him or know of him, maybe you've read some of his books, maybe you've done some of his workshops, you're going to absolutely love this episode. For those that have not, this guy lives in the world of neuroscience, research, wellness, meditation, tapping, and more. So this guy has an amazing brain on his head. He's so incredibly knowledgeable. And I'll tell you what, this is going to be an episode like none we've had before. This is a pandemic special, I should say, and I'm glad to really be able to drop all this information with all of you because the information is going to be useful. He's got some great gifts in here. We mentioned the show notes. There are going to be no show notes here on Facebook. You're actually going to have to head over to our website, lifestylelocker.com, to find those on Monday, or if you're listening through iTunes or any other place you listen to your podcast, all of the details in the show notes will be there. So without further ado, I'm going to click a couple buttons and we're going to have you watch Dawson Church on Lifestyle Locker Radio. So here we go. Hi, I'm Dr. Josh Hant, and welcome to Lifestyle Locker Radio, where we help you create an awesome life and lifestyle. From nutrition to fitness, mindfulness to peak performance, and relationships to money mindset, we bring you on an amazing journey to help you unleash your human potential. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lifestyle Locker Radio. We have an amazing guest today, which I've actually crossed paths with him many, many years ago. This is Dawson Church. Welcome to the show.
Josh, great to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm very excited. I've been engaged with meditation, things that you are beyond an expert in at this point. And I love, as I'm about 80%, 70, 80% through your last book, which is Mind to Matter, and my mind is exploding. So I'm very excited to have our conversation today. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit of your story? Like who is Dawson Church?
My mind exploded as well as I was working on the book and just reading the research. And when I first began the book, I thought, there's probably some science behind our thoughts becoming things, but I'll very carefully trace each of those links in the scientific chain. I'll find some good links, I'll find some broken links, and we'll figure out what really makes sense about the whole idea of manifestation. And I was amazed to discover that our brains literally are much more like transducers of reality and producers of reality than they are about perceivers of reality. We're actually literally making our own worlds up all the time using the activity of our brains. But if you told me that when I was like 10, 15, 25 years old, I would not have believed it. And back then, I was such a miserable person, Josh. Like, people avoided me. People didn't want to get within 10 feet of me. I just had this cloud of gloom and depression. I had kind of a lot of difficult stuff growing up with family issues and strife and problems. And I wound up being just a depressed teenager. And I remember one old and being at a hotel with some family friends and walking past a full-length mirror, and I looked at this face in the full-length mirror. I looked at this guy. I was looking back at me. I had this striped shirt on back in the hippie era. My hair was halfway down my back. I had a leather purse over my shoulder and carry all my books around in. And I looked at that face of that person in the mirror, and my self-talk was, that's the saddest face I've ever seen. And that was me. And I realized I had to do something dramatic to fix myself. So I joined a spiritual community. I learned meditation. I learned hands-on energy healing. I began to read the great philosophies. I began to read what the philosopher Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy, the truth behind all religions. I really looked for answers in that way. And I focused on becoming happier. And, bit by bit, decade by decade, so maybe by 30, I was a little bit happier than I'd been at 20, and at 40, I was a little bit happier than I had been at 30. And I was really into Gestalt therapy back then. And so I take all these Gestalt therapy classes. It's a brilliant therapeutic method. And, I'd be able to tackle a little bit of one of my life problems. But then in 2002, I had this epiphany. I was working with a life coach. I had two businesses. I was in my mid 40s, and I was talking to her about all the problems in my life. And she said to me, well, do you have a regular meditation practice? Now, I learned to meditate at the ashram like 30 years before that, but I did not meditate regularly because, like most people, it's hard. You close your eyes, you start thinking about all the stuff you're going to do on your to-do list and the problems you have in your life, and you can't concentrate. So that had been me. So I said to her, there's no way I have the time to meditate every day. And as I said those words, I realized I'd both given her an argument against and for meditate every day. And I said to myself, I'm going to meditate every single day from now on. So that was painful because I had to set my alarm early, and I'm not an early person. And my kids had to be at school by 7:30, means I had to get up at 6:30. So to meditate, I had to set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. I thought, does the hour 5:30 a.m. even exist in reality? Because I was a night owl. But I set my alarm that next day, and I meditated, and the next day. Now, I didn't have any great breakthroughs at first, but after a month, after 2 months, after 3 months, after 6 months, I began to shift. I then discovered energy therapies. I began to get into energy medicine more, energy healing more. I learned EFT tapping. I learned a whole bunch of different things, techniques in the next 2 or 3 years. And my life changed dramatically. And problems, psychological problems like procrastination, like being overweight, like relationship sabotage, all kinds of problems I'd had literally for decades and made incremental progress on with regular therapy. Suddenly, I was blowing them away one after the other.
Wow.
And so then I got into research seriously. I retrained myself, went back to school, got my PhD, which I'd begun 30 years before, 25 years before at Baylor University. So I did all these things. And then finally, I realized at a certain point, I become a seriously happy person. People that hang around me, they say, Dawson, you're the happiest person I've ever been around. And I just am. I find life just full of humor and wisdom and joy and grace and wellness and exuberance. And so that's really been the process I've shared, not just in my life, but in my books. I retrained myself to look into science and find the hard evidence for a question. You want to know what the reality is? Look at the science. And so in my books are full of empirical science about what it tells us about things like manifestation, not just my own best guess or my own experience, but they're the actual scientific reality of what all these things mean. And so Mind to Matter, that last book, is all about the science of manifestation. And I've become a firm believer, and just the science is compelling for how our thoughts are literally creating the material reality all around us.
Yeah, and that's quite amazing. I mean, you look, when I was been going through the book and going into like the quantum world and getting into, I mean, you get so sciencey in the book. It's actually really great to see that you can take what people have called woo-woo for so many years and bring it into the most modern, let's say, hardcore science there is, with quantum physics and quantum mechanics. And it's pretty powerful. And the stories, for those of you that are going to read the book or have read it, the testimonials, the stories that Dawson shares are mind-blowing, to say the least. But let's talk about meditation, which you mentioned, and we talked pre-chat a little bit when you said you made a decision to meditate every single day, and then it took some time, and then life started to shift and change fast. And I had told you I've been on and off meditator for a pretty long time, for years. And I now track meditation, so I know every single day I do it. And I said, I told you I hit day 90 today, like day 90 in a row. I have not missed a day. Some days have been twice a day. and I feel great. And you were saying, well, there's a reason for that. So
There's a
what's
reason for that.
yeah.
And there's a really important biological threshold you get to at a certain point. So initially people try meditate, they close their eyes, and the way the brain works is very interesting. And I've been working on a new book called Bliss Brain, which really explains this in much more detail. So Mind to Matter has all this brain science in it, but I take it a big step further in Bliss Brain. And so if you think about the way we evolved 100,000 years ago, 400,000 years ago, a million years ago, those early primates and then early hominid species, we weren't designed to close our eyes and still our minds and feel inner peace. If
Mm.
we closed our eyes in the middle of the last ice age, when there was all this scarce competition for resources, I mean, we were like 19,000 years ago in Southern Europe, we had Homo sapiens competing with Neanderthals who were still around,
Uh-huh.
competing with Cro-Magnon man and Denisovans, other hominid species. And I mean, you close your eyes and sit down there on a rock, and you're gonna become somebody's lunch. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's nothing in our evolutionary pathway that suggests that closing your eyes, stilling your mind, and feeling good has any evolutionary utility whatsoever. So our brains have absolutely nothing in them that's programming us to be happy. So that's why I was, in terms of me being a 15-year-old and being paranoid and suspicious and looking for problems, Mother Nature's looking down from on high and saying, this is fabulous. There's no tiger going to sneak up on this guy because he's so paranoid, he's so depressed, he keeps scanning the horizon for
Yeah.
threats. And so there are two important lobes, two important parts of the brain. One is in the prefrontal cortex, the mid-prefrontal cortex. The other is in the back of the brain called the posterior cingulate cortex, PCC. And between them, these two parts of the brains, the mid-prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex in the back, these construct our sense of self. So they're highly alert, they're highly present to what's going on around, they're worrying about me, my survival. Is this fruit gonna make me sick or make me well? Is this gonna benefit me in some way? Is there an opportunity here? So our brains and our sense of self and keeping our sense of self intact is really important and governed by this polarity of these two brain regions, and they're called the default mode network. The
Mm.
default mode network, because our brains default to those whenever we aren't engaged in a task. So whenever we're doing stuff, when my hunter-gatherer ancestor was hunting for an antelope or looking for a tuber with fluid in it to slake his thirst, then the part of the brain that has to do with the task is active. But when you sit around the campfire, when you aren't doing anything, then you're relaxing, then the default mode network comes online and it grabs all available mental capacity. And the default mode network does two big important tasks. It thinks about old threats, the tiger that almost ate you yesterday or 10 years before, and the tiger that might eat you tomorrow. And there are no tigers nowadays. So what happens is, for the meditator now, the novice, you sit there, you close your eyes, and you default immediately to the past and bad stuff that hurt you in the past and bad stuff that might happen in the future. And that's just the state your brain defaults to. And you start to feel awful. You don't feel good at all in meditation because now your brain is defaulting to that state. But if you experience if you're able to just slip out of that state for a few moments, and there are skills you can use that'll trigger a shutting down of the default mode network, and you can start to enter the bliss and the ecstasy of the mystics. And in Mind to Matter, I call that non-local mind. So now you're letting go of local mind, the local self, the default mode network, and you shift into non-local mind. The default mode network literally shuts down, and all kinds of super blissful things happen in your brain. So what's now happening is your mid-prefrontal cortex shuts down, your posterior cingulate cortex shuts down, you start to feel one with the universe, you have floods of this hormone called oxytocin, the bonding hormone happening, you have the parietal lobe of your brain starts to go dark, and that's the part that locates you in space. So you now are feeling blissful waves of all of these wonderful neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin and anandamide. But your brain selfing capacity and the default mode network are shut down, and now you feel one with non-local mind and everything. And you do that often enough, do that for a week and a month and a year, you start to activate these neural circuits. And within a week or two, they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it gets easier and easier to slip into that blissful state. And now you build so much neural capacity that after a few years, what you're finding out, Josh, is you cross that magic threshold and you're turning these temporary neural firing patterns into greater neural mass, and you now have more neurons in those circuits, and you can get there much easier. So the meditator, the payoff is stick with it, you get better at doing it, and it becomes easier and easier and easier.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think of that default mode is, and I'm thinking just as my past, when I was starting to meditate is, and you could let me know if this is what it was, when I would get into, close my eyes and sit down, is that the default mode is, well, the thoughts, but is it also like, I have an itch everywhere in my body. I got to like touch my, figure something out. Is that the default mode? Like it just automatically starts finding things to distract you?
In Blissbrain, I call it the me show. It's all about the me show, my body, my mind, my thoughts. And what happens in those stages where you move past that into that cosmic consciousness is that there are several important neurotransmitters that come online. I mentioned oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and that's the same hormone that causes contractions in labor when a woman gives birth to a baby. It's oxytocin that stimulates labor contractions. When you hug somebody, you feel more oxytocin. When you are close to somebody, you feel more oxytocin. So it's called the hug drug or the cuddle hormone, and it's present in emotional intimacy or physical intimacy. People hug each other, hold each other, they make lots and lots of oxytocin. But when you're bonded to the universe in meditation, then you trigger a flood of oxytocin and you're feeling all this love but again, the selfing network, the me show, shut down. So you feel this love for the universe and you feel this love for others and all this compassion in your heart. And oxytocin then triggers several neurotransmitters, and among them is beta endorphin. So beta endorphins are our own natural pain control drugs, our own pain control neurotransmitters. And they're so powerful that beta endorphin is 3 times as powerful as synthetic morphine. So sure, you feel, I got a mosquito bite when I was on my retreat this last weekend. I already did, and it's itching now that I think about it. But I meditate, and suddenly there's a flood of beta endorphin. So I forget about my arthritic knee. I forget about the pain in my back. I forget about the fact that I'm hungry. I'm suddenly in bliss. Oxytocin produces an increase in nitric oxide, which is an alertness and focus neurotransmitter. It helps stimulate the production of norepinephrine. Now, normally a lot of norepinephrine is to do with anxiety, but a little bit of norepinephrine makes you hyper-focused and hyper-alert, and you don't fall asleep when you have nitric oxide expanding the blood vessels in your prefrontal cortex. You have norepinephrine, you have serotonin and dopamine, and serotonin is an analog. The serotonin molecule docks with receptors in your synapses, and they're the same synapses active when you take psilocybin, magic mushrooms, or microdose of psilocybin. So psilocybin and serotonin have the same molecular shape, so they dock with the same receptor sites in your brain. So you start to feel really good when you have all the serotonin flowing, all this dopamine going on in your brain, and then the pinnacle of pleasure molecules, which I talk about in Blissbrain, is anandamide. And anandamide is named for the Sanskrit word for bliss, ananda, and it's basically the bliss molecule. When people hit those advanced meditative states, they just go into the state of absolute transcendent bliss. It also has the same shape, the same molecular shape as THC, which is the active molecule in marijuana. So essentially, you're sitting there, you've got dopamine going on, which is like cocaine. You've got psilocybin going on in the form of serotonin flooding your brain. You've got huge floods of anandamide happening, so the bliss molecule that's like the THC in marijuana, and you basically wind up being so stoned you don't want to come back. That's why the mystics of old went off into the monastery, into the desert, to the top of the Himalayas, and they just sat there in absolute bliss once they've mastered that. And so that's why it's so addictive, because you're literally consuming these psychoactive compounds, but you're producing them internally inside your own
Hmm.
brain. So you don't want to stop after 90 days. You want your drugs. I wake up in the morning, I'm about as frantic as a heroin addict looking for the needle. I gotta meditate so bad when I wake up in the morning. I
Yeah.
just want to rush down into my meditation chair, and I don't want to even bother with showering or brushing my teeth. I just want to meditate. I'm craving that drug. And that is the positive addiction you get in Bliss Brain. So that's why with experienced meditators, you have both the brain structures and the hardware to make it happen. And you also have all of these, the 7 most pleasurable neurotransmitters and hormones you can expect to have as a human being, all flooding your brain at the same time. And that is seriously nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it sounds like, I've read books and learned a little bit about flow state, and it almost sounds like you're exactly describing flow state where you're in the moment, right? And they,
Oh,
they describe that like you're on, cocaine and marijuana and
yep,
mushroom, like all at the same time, but you're so hype. Is that
yep.
what that is?
Yeah, that idea comes from Stephen Kotler, and he wrote about this
Yes.
brilliantly. And he and Jamie Wheel started the Flow Genome Project. And what they talk about, essentially, and what I emphasize in Bliss Brain, is there are 2 paths to flow. And so this is the flow state I'm referring to here.
Hmm.
And you can get there either by peak performance. So
Hmm.
that person who's, say, running that ultra marathon, and you hit that point where your beta endorphins are just kicking in, and you have all these other pleasurable hormones happening. Or that could be a keynote speaker. It could be someone giving a speech. It could be
Hmm.
a inspired jazz improv saxophonist, and suddenly she's just in this blissful state of peak performance. So peak performance, whether athletic or personal, is one way into flow, and the other way in is efficient meditation, effective meditation. And I say that because when I looked at all of the meditative traditions in Bliss Brain, and again, I'm not interested in ideology. I'm interested in hard science. What does the science show us? And it turns out that the beads, the 108 beads, the saffron robes, and I'm not the Christian sign of the cross and all this stuff. It's nice. But it's window dressing. What really counts is the mental and emotional state you invoke. If counting your beads or saying the rosary puts you in that flow state, great. Use those trappings. But I strip it all down in Bliss Brain and say, these are the neurochemicals you have to evoke. And if doing it through movement evokes those neurochemicals for you, use those. If doing it through athletic performance is your path to flow, use that. But it's not in all the spiritual trappings around meditation that we find effective meditation. And in fact, when I look at the science, it turns out most of those things are a distraction to effective meditation. So you
Oh,
have to do a few really key things that put you in that flow state. But when you do, you're just there like in moments, involuntarily, and you feel seriously good.
okay. So that was going to be my next question. You were saying like between movement, like as an athlete, or through meditation, are the 2 big ways to get into that flow state. Is there a medium, a happy medium where, I could be with my patients, or I could be, with my wife, or whatever it is, and I can get into that resonant, that flow state, without having to be in a meditation or out having to be running 50 miles or 100 miles.
Yeah, and in fact, when we look at the MRIs of adepts, so adepts are people who've done at least 10,000 hours of meditation. Some of
Okay.
the adepts that I talk about in my book, Bliss Brain, have done 60,000 hours
Wow.
of meditation in their lifetime. They've done like Tibetan 3-year, 3-month, 3-day retreats, and they've done maybe 5 of those retreats in their lifetime. They've spent years, 10 to 14 hours a day in meditation for extended periods of time. And we see extensive changes, remodeling in their brain. But even when you do a little bit of it, you start to feel better. And so there is a case history in chapter 1 of Mind to Matter that just blew me away. And I talk about the science, I describe the studies, but then I say, and here's a person who did this, and here's what happened. So here, this guy called Graham Phillips is the host of a TV show in Australia called Catalyst. And they did a whole show on him deciding, this hard-bitten investigative science reporter deciding to try meditation. Now, he was a bit of a skeptic. He didn't really believe in it all, but he said, I'm going to go on an 8-week mindfulness meditation course, and I'll take my whole TV crew into a lab at a top-notch university. Well, I'll have them give me all these tests. I'll do this 8 weeks. I'll have them retest me again on camera. And he did just that. And they found that in 8 weeks, all kinds of shifts happen in his body, in his brain. Several parts, several regions of his brain added so much neural tissue as they were firing and wiring together that he had 3 or 4 percentage points increase in certain brain regions. Now, to get 4 percentage point bigger part of the brain is a big deal in 8 weeks. But one part of his brain in that mindfulness course grew by 22.8%
Wow.
in just 8 weeks. And that's a little structure in the center of the brain called the dentate gyrus, which helps you regulate emotion all throughout the brain. And so it regulates frustration, resentment, anger, blame, shame, all these negative emotions. And you become a much calmer person. And by firing that for just 8 weeks, it grew, the volume of neural tissue in his dentate gyrus grew by 22.8%. Now,
Wow.
that's a whole lot more
Yeah.
hardware available to manage your irritation toward your son or your daughter or your wife or your husband or your teammate, or when the world's going crazy, all this stuff. You sit there and you're really calm because you have a bigger, physically bigger volume of neural tissue in your dentate gyrus. So it's making a big difference in all your relationships as you build up all that brain hardware.
And that's huge. That's really amazing when you talk about emotional change, like you say, having growth in an area that can regulate emotional capacity to deal with all of these things. And I just think about the world that we're living in currently. Like, what is the biggest thing that's going on in people's lives is fear, worry, anger. All of these things are going on in massive places now, massive ways around the world. I think meditation can be such a massive solution. I mean, if everybody started meditating, I mean, you tell me a time, but I would say if we all started meditating 20 minutes a day, every single day or more, I think it could be profound.
It would be profound. And in chapter 2 of Mind to Matter, I talk about this phenomenon called emotional contagion. And researchers in the 70s began, actually, it was a funny story. The main author that we associate in science with this field is called Sigil Barsaid. And Barsaid was working in an office in the 70s and realized that the emotional tone of the office, how people felt in the office, really was really good some days and really bad most days. And realized that the times it was better was when one particular employee was out sick. When that person was not in the office, everyone else felt better. And Barsaid realized that this one person actually was producing emotional contagion like an infectious disease all around them. So now there's been all this research, 30, 40 years of research into how our emotions affect those around us. And it turns out that in some giant long-term studies, researchers have found that if I am happier, if I, Dawson Church, am happier, then the person who lives next to me, who I see occasionally, is about 35% likely to be happy, or about 35% happier if I'm happy. So my emotions are transmitting themselves to my team members, to my wife, to the people in the grocery store. I went grocery shopping a couple of days ago, and I just smiled at the woman. I put in my face mask and said, I'm smiling behind my mask because I really enjoy coming here to the grocery outlet. And I just love the people in grocery outlet. They're so nice. And then she didn't have she had a full face transparent mask. And she smiled and she said, oh, thank you so much. I just needed to hear that today. And then she turned to the person bagging groceries behind her and said something nice to her. And so that's emotional contagion. So
Yeah.
the person next to me is 35% happier. The person next to her is on average 15% happier. And the person next to her, who I didn't even know, I've never even met, is 6% happier. So there are 3 degrees of contagion that occur around us
Wow.
when we are happy. We are making the people around us happy. And if everyone meditated for that 20 minutes a day, Josh, they would be happier. They'd be agents of positive emotional contagion. And then everyone around them gets happier. So it may seem selfish and self-centered. Actually, it's not. If you get happier,
Yeah.
you're suffering more cannot relieve the suffering of others. You can't suffer enough to make people around you suffer less. If you get happy, your emotional contagion is affecting people 3 layers out and can be affecting 100 people a day. So that is truly the answer.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm just thinking about, my practice. Um, small and large offices, would there, I mean, this would be, I think, such an added benefit if teams or offices would show up 10, 15, 20 minutes before they had to, and everybody just sat down together and maybe in a guided meditation, or even just in silent meditation for those 10, 15, 20 minutes. I mean, what kind of impact would we have on our companies?
Well, actually, what I've been playing with recently is putting people into group flow. So individual flow is great, but in Bliss Brain, I asked one big question that no one's actually ever asked before in science. I said, we now have enough MRI research over the last 20 years to know what produces the best neuroplasticity the quickest, which meditative practices result in that rewiring the fastest. And one of the ways of doing it, there are three triggers that rewire your brain faster than anyone else. One of them is doing it in groups, one is doing it in the most intense way, and the one is being in compassion. So doing it in groups, I've been really playing with group flow and occasionally working with, say, a board of directors or a nonprofit or a team. And then I actually have the team do about a 20-minute group flow exercise, because research shows that people in flow are 5 times as productive as people who aren't, and they have 490% better ability to solve complicated problems.
That's
So
it.
your complex solving ability and your productivity increase fivefold, not
Yeah.
50%, 500%
Yeah.
if you're in flow. Now, if you put a group together and bring the whole group into flow, so I've been doing it with my own teams, I've been doing it with teams with other organizations, and I sit there with a board of directors, and maybe we have 12 people in the room, or we have 40 people in the room. So occasionally I've had over 1,000 people in the room, like with Tony Robbins. I did it with Tony Robbins group, and we put hundreds of people into group flow, and then they start to collaborate with each other. With all of that increased problem solving ability, you're at a whole new level of
Yeah.
function. Yeah.
That's, I mean, I think in the health world, and in our world, like in that natural health world, this could be massive. I think this is something we're going to have to start to figure out how to implement in our practice, whether it's during the morning shift or at lunch break. I think that's something that could be really profound, not only for our team, but for the people we're interacting with. You know, like you said, that's that 3 degrees of happiness, of contagion. I think that's so cool. That's one of the best, I don't want to call it a concept, one of the best pieces of science I've heard with just emotion alone.
You know, one really startling example of it was when a group of researchers took the feeds of a small number of Facebook users and they modified their feeds very slightly to include either more negative posts or more positive posts. They just tweaked their feeds a tiny bit. And then they measured the posts that these people made. And they made, over the course of the next while, posts to their friends on Facebook. Their friends made posts to other friends. And within 2 weeks, 680,000 people, okay, that's 2/3 of a million people, had experienced emotional contagion from that small group that began a week before. So emotions are contagious and spread all over us. And those that got more negative material in their feeds then were producing more negative posts to other people, and they were passing them on. More positive ones, the same thing. So absolutely, we're having an effect on people all around us just by the quality of our own experience.
That's amazing. Using social media to create positive emotional contagion. I think that's we're going to be doing that with this when we go live. So let's just jump into, I want to touch on EFT, some tapping for a few minutes before we finish up, because I think this is important. People have heard of tapping. I've had a recent experience with tapping, as I spoke to you before. What is tapping? Why would someone benefit from tapping in meditation?
So in my book, Mind to Matter, I lay out 30 practices that science shows affect you epigenetically or affect neural function, or in some way are evidence-based. They produce a real change in your level of internal stress and internal biochemistry, the production of stress hormones like cortisol. And there are 30 of them in there. And I just encourage people to play around with different ones. There's yoga, there's qigong, there's grounding yourself. Time in nature is a potent anti-stressor. So all of these things are good. But the two that I use, and I really teach these and emphasize these the most. One is meditation and one is EFT tapping. Because if you don't have time for a break, if you don't have time to take a yoga class, you just can carve out that 20 minutes each morning to meditate, and then EFT takes 2 minutes. And EFT is regulating the flow of energy through your body's acupuncture meridians. And there are 12 of these meridians, 12 meridians. They have end points, like over here is the end point of the central meridian, over here is the governing meridian, over here is the stomach meridian. And you can measure these with electromechanical devices. They have particular electrical charge characteristics and conduction characteristics, so you can measure them with certain kinds of equipment. And when you tap on them, or you can use acupuncture with a needle, but that's messy and you need a professional. But you can just tap on these points as well. So tapping on these acupuncture points regulates the flow of energy through you and produces a hugely beneficial effect. And so what you're doing is with EFT, you're thinking about the bad stuff. Like we worked with one veteran in our Veteran Stress Project, this massive project. We've actually treated over 20,000 veterans free of charge in the last decade.
Wow.
People dealing with flashbacks and nightmares, intrusive thoughts, Vietnam veterans, Afghanistan veterans, Korean War veterans, Iraq veterans, all of these veterans suffering from PTSD. And research shows that in 6 one-hour sessions, that their PTSD symptoms just dissipate. All of those things go away, and they have much better lives after that. And so they're tapping while they're remembering the bad stuff. One veteran talked about the day in Vietnam in 1970 when his best friend was killed. And he and his best friend went on patrol every day, and he always walked on the right. His best friend walked on the left. And that particular day, they had reversed positions. So he was on the left, his best friend was on the right, and his best friend was killed by a sniper's bullet. And he'd been haunted by grief and anger and regret for 40 years. And his story was, he took the bullet meant for me, because they'd been walking in opposite positions that one day. And so I'm getting chills as I tell this story. I mean, I've told this story many times before, but just remembering the emotional impact. This guy has been suffering now with PTSD for 40 years. And as he tapped and told his therapist the story, he suddenly had an epiphany. He just realized, I love this guy, but just like I would wish I could have taken the bullet for him, he would have wanted to take the bullet for me. And when he had that flip in his thinking about it, as he tapped, finally, after 40 years, he had inner peace. After his first session with a therapist doing EFT, he said, after that first session with you, I got my first uninterrupted night's sleep since Vietnam 40 years ago. Okay, that's the impact it has. And it has an effect on insomnia, on anxiety and depression. So you regulate the body's energy flows. You think about trauma, because I can also tell you that unfortunately, I talk about happiness, and you can't skip the step of working with and releasing your own trauma. And so you can't say, have PTSD and say, I'll just meditate and be happy. You close your eyes and try and meditate. And then again, the default mode network kicks in. You think about all the bad stuff. You have to have a trauma therapy like EFT as well. Release all of those things. So the two things you have to do is releasing trauma through EFT, releasing negative stress through EFT, and then meditation. And those two together in tandem are what's really the most effective.
So Dawson, where can people find more information on EFT? I know you have a pretty awesome website.
Yeah, we have a huge website. It gets tens of thousands of visitors a month. It's one of the most popular meditation and tapping websites on the web. And if you go to Dawson, my name, DAWSON, Dawson, and then gift.com, DawsonGift.com, puts you into a portal where you can get access to the Veteran Stress Project, the free EFT mini manual. We have a cool new eco meditation over there, new meditation on the very top of that page. And we found in various clinical trials we've done over 100 studies of EFT. And we've also done several of this meditation method that we teach called eco meditation. And we discovered about 2 or 3 years ago, we had some articles published in medical journals showing that as you lower levels of stress hormones, as your level of adrenaline goes down, your level of cortisol goes down, that all kinds of good things go up. and among them is immunoglobulin antibodies. And these antibodies are the things that bind to the spikes on coronaviruses and stop them attacking your cells. And so if you have lots of these immune antibodies in your system, you're much more immune to viruses. And so we have, so in one study, we found that a weekend of tapping meditation, it raised your immunity level by 27%, and a week of doing it raised your immune level by 113%. So when we dug up these studies we done earlier, and I've done a meditation at that DawsonGift.com link, and that is actually applying this, doing a little bit of tapping, and then doing eco meditation, doing it to support enhanced immunity. And so you can benefit yourself right away just by using that link and then applying that meditation to the focus of raising your immunity, lowering your stress, lowering cortisol, and then boosting those antibody immunoglobulins.
I think that's great. And when is the new book coming out? When is Bliss Brain coming out?
Comes out September 16th. And that's really a thrill. Mind to Matter has been out for a couple of years. It's sold over 100,000 copies. We have almost 1,000 5-star reviews on Amazon.com. And when it hits 1,000, by the way, Amazon's going to give the book a huge boost. So if you've read the book, haven't given it a review yet, just please go to mindtomatter.com, click on the link, give it a review on Amazon, because I'm focused on those 1,000 5-star reviews. Josh, we've had so many people read the book and say, this was the book that finally convinced me to meditate. So I want everyone to be one of those people who gets that message, and Amazon's going to give the book a huge boost the moment it hits those 1,000 5-star reviews.
Yeah, so help Dawson. I'm going to give my review today. I'm 80% through, 70-80%, so I'm going to finish the book in the next probably day or two, and I'm going to give the review ahead of time if you don't mind. But please get the book. It's essential to your health, your well-being. And now that we learned, if you go to DawsonGift.com, you're going to be able to help yourself increase or maximize your immune function with something that you can do at home. Another tool in the toolbox to keep your body healthy and strong. So Dawson, I want to thank you. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I think I'm looking at the time. I feel like we could talk for a day. But I want to thank you. I want to make sure people are making it all the way through the episode, and make sure everybody scroll down the show notes to check out all of his details. We're going to have all the social links. We'll have the link we just mentioned. We'll have the link to Amazon so you can get the most recent book, and then you can pre-order the new book and get it on September 16th. So thank you, Dawson.
It's a joy. I just love doing this work, and this is just taking us, Josh, as a species, emotional contagion. I mean, we're in the middle of all kinds of social upheaval right now. But I can tell you, if you look at the end of Bliss Brain, I look at the 30-year trajectory, the 100-year trajectory, and we are changing as a species. We have an unimaginably positive future in front of us. If you get into the nitty-gritty of each day's news cycle, it's hard to see that. But if you step back and look at the research showing how global wealth is increasing despite the crashes of 1989, 2000, 2008, 2020, despite all those crashes, the average global citizen is 3 times as wealthy as they were 40 years ago. Our lifespan has doubled in the last 100 years as a globe. The amount of literacy has risen. All kinds of metrics are showing a rapidly improving world for people. So we are on this emotional contagion, and all this real human flourishing is becoming a remarkable phenomenon. And as we apply all of our 5-fold problem-solving ability, our 5-fold productivity to global problems like climate change and racial injustice and food shortages, clean water, all the problems we face, as we apply these in upgraded human brains to those things, I'm confident we're going to just solve them and have a really remarkable future ahead of us. So
Agreed.
That's the world that your children, my great-grandchildren will be living in.
That's phenomenal. So Dawson Church, again, everyone, thank you so much. And we'll maybe see you again.
Happy to.